Hello and welcome to China Tonight. I'm Samuel Yang.
And I'm Sam's evil twin, Annie Louie. On the show, where have the wolf warriors gone?
Plus the search for the next Dalai Lama.
They are planning to interfere in His Holiness Dalai Lama's reincarnation.
But first, what's making news? And China's all-important two sessions continued this week, with thousands of delegates from across the country gather in Beijing to talk politics. It's when meetings of both the National People's Congress, where the laws are made, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, where they just throw around ideas, happen separately but at the same time. Outgoing Premier Li Keqiang kicked off the NPC meeting by delivering his report card on the state of the nation, praising the work of the government in the previous 12 months.
面对风高浪急的国际环境和艰巨繁重的国内改革发展稳定任务，以习近平同志为核心的党中央团结带领全国各族人民迎难而上。
He also used the opportunity to set economic targets for the year and announce an increase in the military budget of more than 7%.
今年发展的主要预期目标是，国内生产总值增长5%左右，城镇新增就业1200万人左右，城镇调查失业率5.5%左右，居民消费价格涨幅 3%左右，居民收入增长与经济增长基本同步。
President Xi said a strong military was necessary to build a strong nation. For more, I'm joined now by Katrina Yu, China correspondent for Al Jazeera in Beijing. Katrina, welcome to China Tonight.
Thank you, Samuel. Really lovely to be here.
Katrina, the 5% GDP growth target is quite modest compared with previous years.
That's right. We were expecting anything between 5 and 6%. And what 5% on the lower end tells us is that we're not going to see any aggressive stimulus pro-growth policies. Instead, Beijing is very much going to focus on stability and restructuring because it seems China is very aware that going forward, there's going to be some huge challenges for China's economy. We just came out of about 3 years of this strict zero COVID policy that basically strangled China's economic development. And we're still seeing a drag on consumer spending and investment confidence because of that. And we're also seeing this increasing challenge when it comes to the relationship between China and the United States and sanctions and embargoes, which are really hurting China's technology firms.
And how significant is the boost to defense spending?
7.2% is the boost. Now, we were expecting, of course, a jump in military spending, but usually that jump is pretty pegged to the GDP target. So for the fact that this outpaces the GDP growth target means that China is nervous. It's nervous about the security situation around China. It's nervous about the wider geopolitical situation. It's watching Ukraine. It's got tensions still with the South China Sea and its neighbors there. And of course, there's Taiwan. So we had Premier Li Keqiang at the beginning of the NPC say that they're going to boost military preparedness as well. And that, I think, is really looking at how ready China is to act should there be any tensions around the island.
Now the meetings are coming to an end. Katrina, what can we expect for the final days?
So in the final days, we're expecting two things. One thing is for a leadership reshuffle. We're expecting to see a new premier also. Also, no big surprise, that's expected to be Li Qiang to conveniently replace Li Keqiang. And Li Qiang is also a close former personal aide of Xi Jinping and a loyalist in terms of Communist Party members. And what we're essentially going to see when it comes to the leadership is basically at all very important levels of Communist Party leadership, it is stacked with people who are either hand-chosen or very loyal to President Xi Jinping. So he's going to be very comfy when it comes to the leadership of the country going forward. Secondly, we're also going to see a big restructuring when it comes to the state councils, which are essentially Chinese ministries. And I think those are going to fall really under two areas, the financial system and the sci-tech area. So in the financial system, what we had before and what Deng Xiaoping, a previous Chinese leader, did was really forge a system where you had government and Communist Party organs or Communist Party agencies work in tandem together. And Deng Xiaoping and many of his successors thought that that was really the basis of good governance, more checks and balances. But under Xi Jinping, we're going to see more power put under the hands of the Communist Party. Essentially, some agencies will be smooshed together. They'll get rid of some other agencies, or they'll create an overarching Communist Party agencies. And the Communist Party argues that will allow Beijing to do better policy making, more efficient, nimble policy making, and less bureaucracy. But of course, the net result is more power in the hands of the Communist Party and more power and oversight in the hands of Xi Jinping. And I think the restructuring when it comes to science and technology, that's important because that is a direct response to these increasingly hostile tensions and this competition between the United States and Beijing. Xi Jinping made a comment on Monday, which was a rare acknowledgement of the challenges that Washington has put on Beijing when it comes to these technology sanctions. Xi Jinping has made it such a big priority this year going forward for China to be technologically self-reliant. So the Ministry of Science and Technology is going to get a big boost. It's going to get basically a fire under its bottom. It's going to work. It's going to shed some of its, I guess, less important arms. So they're going to go to other government ministries like agriculture, etc. And it's really going to focus on innovation so that China going forward, if things don't improve with the United States, if things don't improve with its access to the global market, that it won't suffer and its economy will be okay. And most importantly, its own ability to produce its own technology will be secured for the future.
Katrina, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Samuel.
And the two sessions were dominating conversations online too. And I'll tell you why. A huge number of proposals put forward were about increasing the birth rate, like
offer childcare subsidies for families with children under 3 years of age.
Eliminate the differences in birth incentive policies based on the number of children.
Give cash incentives for having children, particularly the first one.
Extend male parental leave.
Have assisted reproductive technology covered by medical insurance.
Free education for your third child.
One delegate even said 3-child families should be issued with special certificates. Fool me once. I worked very hard for 3 years to get a special certificate at uni, and I'm still in debt. Not doing that again. As this person said on Weibo,
at a glance, everything is about having children. Is there no other important issue?
Of course, not every suggestion put forward by the 2,000-strong CPPCC had to do with childbirth. That would just be weird. Although people may not realise the CPPCC are actually changing their name to Chinese people praising childbirth chaotically. But there were a few so-called wacky proposals that got attention by netizens too, like the proposal to set an age limit for people using artificial intelligence technology, a proposal to ban children from playing online games completely, or even a request for there to be legal consequences for those caught slandering traditional Chinese medicine practices. While we're at it, we should really add a few more to the list. 1. Hosts of all news shows about China should receive a free slice of cake each episode. 2. Everyone born in the 90s is entitled to a massage on a Friday. And 3. Anyone caught disrespecting women will be banished from the kingdom. Ow, ow, that's too firm. I don't like it. Get out of here, you're banished. The other hot topic on Chinese social media this week was this guy, the new Foreign Minister Qin Gang. While fronting the press at the meetings, he was asked about a perceived softening of China's diplomatic approach in recent months.
记得我刚到美国任大使的时候，美国媒体惊呼。 中国战狼来了！现在我回来当外长了，这称号又不给我了。
He even referred to the widely used term wolf warrior diplomacy as a discourse trap, saying that it was a simplification of China's diplomatic style by Western media.
中国的外交有足够的厚道与善意，但当豺狼当道。 恶狼来袭时，中国的外交官必须与狼共舞，保家卫国。
Netizens discussed the comments under several hashtags, and the views were mixed.
Wolf warrior diplomacy is certainly suppressed right now, if not completely terminated.
Why is the West so hysterical about wolf warrior diplomacy? Because they prefer that China act like sheep.
Oh! So, is the wolf warrior now an endangered species? China Tonight's Yi Han takes a look.
就做战狼又何妨呢？
美国病了，病得不轻。
这是选择性、间歇性的失明和失聪，这是病，得治。
These are examples of what is commonly referred to as wolf warrior diplomacy, aggressive diplomatic posturing by China's foreign ministry spokespeople.
The term wolf warrior actually came from a very popular nationalist Chinese movie that appeared a few years before the COVID. And the movie was about how a retired Chinese soldier was defending China's national interests, protecting Chinese nationals, helping locals in the African continent.
And while many have been on the receiving end of this aggression, Australia has been an outsized target.
China's anger at Australia's push for an inquiry has seen its ambassador warn of a student and tourist boycott. It's already blocked beef from 4 abattoirs, and tomorrow China's expected to slap an export ban on Australian barley.
When COVID first happened, there was this global accusation against China for being the origin of COVID.
Blaming China for the global pandemic.
This is the Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan virus was declared a pandemic.
Their China virus.
That triggered the self-defense mechanism within the Chinese Communist Party. Now think about it. If China was eventually held responsible for COVID, what does that say about the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy at home? And what does it say about China's legitimacy to be called a great power in the world?
Later in 2020, the deputy director of the Foreign Ministry's Information Department, Zhao Lijian, even tweeted a fictional art piece depicting a grinning Australian soldier slitting the throat of an Afghan boy.
It is utterly outrageous, and it cannot be justified on any basis whatsoever.
China sees Australia as a regional player, a regional power, but doesn't see Australia as a peer. Australia's position, a small country with mid-sized power, is an easy target for China to pick off.
However, Chinese diplomats were not always known to be so combative. Following Mao Zedong's chaotic and bloody Cultural Revolution, Deng Xiaoping implemented a foreign policy strategy called 韬光养晦, meaning keep a low profile and bide your time.
Under Deng Xiaoping, the major focus was on economic development, so the opening up reform period, really boosting China's GDP and becoming sort of a key player in the world's economy as a manufacturing hub.
While Deng's strategy has proven to be fruitful for China's prosperity, Chinese diplomats were sometimes mocked by the increasingly nationalistic public as being soft and docile.
Chinese netizens are generally very proud of China's achievements over the last 40 years. And I think that wolf warrior diplomacy is simply an articulation of that pride, that assertion of China's arrival into the world, but how it resonates with people outside of China is a different story.
But I think what people would notice most as a distinction between Xi and his immediate 3 predecessors, Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and Hu Jintao, is that Xi Jinping no longer believes that China needs to keep a low profile. We have built enough strengths which would afford us maybe not as polite or as tolerant as we used to be.
Under Xi Jinping, we've seen that collective leadership dissolve away, and those that are in those small groups, those in the Politburo, have all been appointed as loyal allies of Xi Jinping, rather than as a counterpoint or providing different perspectives to Xi Jinping himself. And we see the likes of the former Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Zhao Lijian, being sort of the mouthpiece of that ambition.
But now things could be changing again. Recent months have seen an apparent shift in tone in China's diplomatic policies and demeanor.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he had a very positive discussion with Chinese President Xi Jinping, the first meeting between the leaders of the two nations in 6 years.
In January, Zhao Lijian, perhaps the most recognizable wolf warrior diplomat to Australians, was quietly removed from the coveted spokesperson's podium to join the Foreign Ministry's Department of Boundary and Ocean Affairs, at the margin of the ministry's power circle.
After 3 years of wolf warrior diplomacy, 2 things have happened. The first one is what China's economy has suffered. Last year, China's economy had the slowest growth rate, around 3% since 1979. And the second thing that has happened is that China has alienated itself from the world. Globalization is still happening. It has continued on just without China. Globalization looks increasingly like desensitization. So I think at this time, the Chinese leader have made the judgment call that China needs to reintegrate with the world. And that means that, well, foreign diplomacy is not going to be the popular choice anymore.
The question is, now that Zhao Lijian has been moved far away from the podium, does it mean that Xi's ambition has changed? Or are the diplomatic wolf warriors just simply laying low and biding their time?
I don't think the fundamentals of China's foreign policy has changed. Certainly not under Xi Jinping, because he's still at the apex of foreign policy making. So I think it's sort of regroup, re-strategize, taking a softer tone for now.
If the conditions arise for China to defend itself again, like it has in the past couple of years, I think foreign diplomacy will very possibly make a comeback.
Events were being held in cities across the world this week to mark the 64th anniversary of Tibet's uprising against the Chinese Communist Party. People took to the streets and held vigils to commemorate the events of 1959. It was shortly after that failed uprising that Tibetan leader the Dalai Lama fled to Dharamshala in India, where he established a government in exile. Although he's no longer the exiled government's political leader, he's still the spiritual leader. His advancing age is prompting discussions about who will succeed him, while China's efforts to take control of Tibet's religious affairs have been growing stronger.
I want to offer a special welcome to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
Long live His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
A Nobel Prize winner and the world's most famous Buddhist, the Dalai Lama has been the spiritual leader of Tibet for more than 80 years.
The very purpose of our life is happy life.
He is one of the most loved and admired people in this world. He is a moral leader. He is a champion of peace.
Known for his commitment to Tibetan autonomy and preservation of its Buddhist culture.
We seeking genuine autonomy, not seeking independence.
But now he's 87, and his followers are looking to the future.
He stated that when he is about 90 years old, he will consult all the high lamas of Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and then he will decide on his reincarnation.
Tenzin Gyatso was born in a rural village in Tibet. Following an extensive search, he was identified as the 14th reincarnation of the Dalai Lama at the age of 3. He went on to assume full political power at only 15.
India offered the God King of Buddhism a safe refuge from the communist Chinese.
Less than a decade later, he fled to India following Tibet's unsuccessful revolt against Chinese occupation. Followed by thousands of Tibetans, he established a government in exile in Dharamshala, on the edge of the Himalayas.
I believe I can serve much better from outside.
He spent the decades since lobbying world leaders on behalf of his people as China continued to crack down on dissent.
He is the life and soul of Tibet. His tireless effort and farsightedness has saved Tibet and Tibetan people from becoming a forgotten nation and a forgotten people.
While he stepped down as political leader in 2011, the Dalai Lama says discussions about his death are premature.
His Holiness is in very good health, and he has assured the Tibetan people and his followers that he will live a very, very long life.
But a power struggle over his reincarnation has already begun. Beijing says Tibet has been part of China's territory for centuries and denies any oppression.
西藏是国家重要的安全屏障，群众安全感满意度保持在99以上。
如今的西藏边疆经济蓬勃发展
百姓生活显著改善。
Chinese Communist Party, they already, with their political motive, they are planning to interfere in His Holiness Dalai Lama's reincarnation.
Describing the Dalai Lama as a dangerous separatist and a wolf in a monk's robes. The Communist Party says reincarnations of Tibetan religious figures must be approved by Chinese authorities.
China still consider Dalai Lama reincarnation something very important. So they have more concern about next Dalai Lama than me.
The very purpose of reincarnation is to continue the work left by the previous Dalai Lama. So if he born in a sort of Chinese-controlled region, he will not be able to continue his work.
According to Buddhist beliefs, the Dalai Lama has full control over his reincarnation. He's raised several possibilities of what might happen after he dies, hinting that reincarnation might take place outside of Tibet, or might not happen at all. Whatever China's plans, his supporters are refusing to give up.
Dalai Lama and Tibetan people are inseparable. Their heart and soul are always with His Holiness Dalai Lama. They put their hope and trust on His Holiness Dalai Lama and not on CCP leaders.
Bill Birtles is the ABC's East Asia correspondent, and he joins me now from Taipei. Bill, the CCP says they must approve the reincarnation of all Tibetan religious leaders.
That's right, Sam. It is ironic given that the Chinese Communist Party is strictly atheist. And this issue of Beijing needing to approve religious leaders, including the next Dalai Lama, has been one of the sticking points in dialogue between representatives of the Dalai Lama and the exiled government and officials in Beijing. There have been no talks for more than a decade. Now, Penpa Tsering is the political leader of Tibet's exiled government based in Dharamshala in India. I asked him, does he think there is any hope of talks with Beijing resuming anytime soon?
We remain very positive. We remain optimistic. As Buddhists, we don't believe in permanence. So impermanence, as Western psychologists also say, change is the only constant. So there has to be change inside China. The question is when, and there also has to be progress in the process of contact and dialogue and negotiation with the Chinese government. But that's also a question as to when that will happen. And if there is a positive gesture with full commitment to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict from the Chinese side, we are always there ready to resolve it, because we feel that this is one of the most easiest things that Chinese government can resolve, because we are not now talking about sovereignty issues anymore. We are committed to the middle way approach that was first proposed by His Holiness and approved by the Parliament.
I know he's on record saying that he will live for another 3 decades or so, but in future, when he's not around anymore, what is the plan, given that Beijing insists it must have a role in approving and selecting the next Dalai Lama?
So my advice to the Chinese government is to leave religious affairs to the Tibetans. Don't get involved in that. You do your governance. That's what your job is. But right now, there is no trust between the rulers and the ruled, whether it's the Tibetans or the Uyghurs or the Mongols or the Hong Kongers or the Chinese people themselves, and no good relation with any of its neighboring countries. So it'll take a very, very long time for China to win confidence back from the international community, including India, where I live now. Because of China's belligerence, if there is no disengagement on all points, there will be no restoration of normalization of relations.
You're using the 64th anniversary of the Tibetan uprising to highlight what you've described as a cultural genocide, the practice of Chinese authorities forcing school students in Tibet into state-run boarding schools. What is your understanding of the latest situation there?
There has been a progression of policies over the last 5-6 decades in terms of eradicating the national identity of the Tibetan people, which is essentially the language and religion of the Tibetan people, which leads to the culture, the Buddhist culture of Tibetans. So right now, the situation has not changed from the reports that have come out from the special rapporteurs of the United Nations. And according to our study also, we have found that more than 150,000 Tibetan children below the age of 6 are now put in Montessori schools, where again, the same tactics are being followed, where you don't learn Tibetan language, you are kept away from your families, and you are taught only Chinese and Chinese ideology.
Chinese officials have said, though, that the boarding schools are voluntary, that the Tibetan language is taught in special courses, as well as Tibetan culture, and that education standards are much higher in these city-run boarding schools compared to the smaller rural schools that were shut down and folded into this broader system. What's your view on that?
The Chinese will keep saying whatever they want to say. It's not enough for the Chinese leadership to say that there is freedom. It should be visible for the international community. If the Tibetan parents are happy, then why should they be complaining? Of course, we are not against better education for Tibetans, but we are definitely against sinicization of the whole educational system to turn every Tibetan into a Chinese.
You've been in the United States recently promoting a Tibet bill that would force the US government to recognise Tibet as an unresolved conflict. What are you hoping that could potentially achieve, and what sort of reception do you think American politicians and perhaps governments elsewhere would have to this idea?
We have been saying that to the international community that if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China, you are going against international law, because we have only one agreement with the People's Republic of China, which is the 17-point agreement signed in May 1951. Now, this was forced upon us post-aggression of Tibet in October 1950. So under international law, any agreement post-aggression is null and void. So if international law has to be applied, then Tibet cannot be an exception. Chinese propaganda is so strong that people tend to believe that Tibet must have been part of China since time immemorial or antiquity, as Chinese government says. So it is very important not only to send a message to the Chinese government, but also to the international community that we lived on that plateau for so many centuries and everyone else has been deciding for us.
But surely lobbying US politicians trying to get the US involved to put pressure on Xi Jinping's government in today's climate would only make authorities in Beijing even less likely to engage on this issue.
Now, ultimately, I always tell my people also that we have to take these two realities into consideration. One reality is that if there has to be a peaceful resolution in a non-violent way, which is mutually beneficial, that can be done only by having negotiation with the Chinese leadership. And on the other hand, we also realize that no other nation will put aside their national interests and put Tibet's national interests first. So far, there has been no traction whatsoever. So we have nothing to lose. So any support that's coming from any government is welcome.
Well, political leader of Tibet's government in exile, Penpa Tsering, thank you very much for speaking to China Tonight.
Thank you.